Lynn from the Echo Chamber shared this, and it is really making me think. I'll read it out so that you can see what I'm going to be working with. So it says the echoist-narcissist pairing in a group. Once an echoist-narcissist pairing has formed within a group, this pair is less penetrable by external influences than other individual members, protecting the couple from external threat, perceived or real. It also stops the pair from fully benefiting from the growth that being in a group has to offer. Have you seen this happen? Type work, friends, family or community in the comments to let me know. So I did respond, but also I haven't been able to get this out of my head. I have experienced this quite a lot, and so what I have done is I've turned to the Realcovery Model, which is what I have made, a model I've made to help me in terms of real recovery transformation, and also it often acts as a mirror and a processing tool. So that's what I've done. I've put this through that model, and I'd like to tell you the story of that now. So please forgive me if my words are a bit slurry and slow. I'm quite fatigued, but I really want to share this. It feels important. Also, everything in this video is my own personal processing and personal understanding. I'm not telling anyone else what to think or what you should believe. This just really resonates with me. I think I'm definitely experienced this playing out in my life right now. So it felt good and helpful to run it through the Realcovery Model. Okay, so I'm going to turn the camera around and I'll show you what I've drawn. So this is the Realcovery Model. It's made of these elements. It's made of moments of making, unmaking and making. And it's made of phases that you can personalize. So this can be really individual. You can personalize this however you want to fit the experience you're going through at the time. So it's like a scaffolding. You personalize the scaffolding. The scaffolding then, when it's personalized, becomes a container that you can fill with your stuff. That's going to be important for you to understand as I tell you the story of my processing. The model, as well as having 3 triangles, which could be beginning, middle and end, can also have 4 phases, 3 phases or 4 phases, which would look more like this. I'll do a different video about that at some point. In the Realcovery Journal, this book that I'm using, there are blank Realcovery models at the back for you to complete yourself. And then this is the one that I've just done in relation to Lynn's post. So I'm processing the idea of these echoist-narcissist pairs forming in a group and just sort of like trying to figure out why that might happen. So I was considering the early life of people. In early life, I would be born here at this point, and then I would expand to become an adult. I would go through being baby to toddler to child to teenager to adult. I expand like that. In healthy relationships, in the early years of a person's life, there is a feedback loop. So the parent gives to the child and the child responds to the parent, and there's this sort of looping. I'll just turn to another image that I've got in this journal to show you that a bit. So when I'm using the model like this is what I call the growing up on the outside phase. So there is the, I wonder if it'll zoom in. Oh, it might not get it. Anyway, there's the moment of conception. There's the growing, there's the baby, and there's all the sort of experience of what it's like to grow up into an adult, the growing up on the outside phase. I'm also sharing this version of the model because it shows the sort of back and forth dynamics that can happen between people. Now, I know that I learned to love by experiencing what it's like to be loved, and then I was able to replicate that. I know that I know how to be kind because I experienced what it's like for someone to be kind to me. There's this two-way sort of thing that happens. And that's quite important, I think, for the understanding that I am gaining of why a pairing might happen later in life. So I'm coming back to this. This thing that I've drawn represents a split. Now, I think as a baby, if you live in a dynamic that is balanced, this would not look like this. This would look more like a yin-yang shape. You'd be allowed to be cross and grumpy, and you'd receive kindness and comfort for that. But if in response to being cross and grumpy, you receive pain and harm, things get split into fight and flight and black and white, and all sorts of biological things happen. And then this is not very safe for a person. This split is felt. Split feels dangerous. Split feels weakened. I'm learning that more and more and more. So, this kind of split can reach a point of crisis, because if everything is so split, it's then threatening the survival and the life of the person. Then you can end up going from this vertical experience of growing up and expanding, and instead of being upright and breathing, all the biological systems, in fact, the polyvagal theory talks about this, biological systems would then trigger a splat, like a literal biological freeze. It's like playing dead. It's like, I'm not upright and breathing, and I am not being noticed. I'm going to make my breathing really, really, really small. I'm going to be really, really, really quiet and still, and I'm going to lie completely flat and horizontal so I won't be noticed by the danger. So in kind of when this gets really bad, we're no longer able to stand up whole and tall in the center of our lives. The phase of unmaking happens instead. That's what I call this. And that's why I've drawn this shape right across the middle. Now, I am again just going to quickly turn to another page in the journal to show you where this shape comes from. This is the vertical Realcovery model. And then something that can happen is that you can grow up into the shape you recognize. You can grow up into an identity, but then something can come along and unmake that. Now, if it's a moment of unmaking, it might just happen as an instant, and you might just carry on afterwards straight up, no issues. But if unmaking turns into a longer phase, it is like the whole thing falls over. Boom, there you go, splat. And what it can do is it can become similar to this thing that's called the breath pattern, which was developed by the Art of Hosting community. And that represents the cycle of one breath. So you might diverge, which is essentially taking in a breath and expanding. And then this part here is where you might hold that breath. Now, if you're holding a breath for too long, you can experience real sensations of discomfort and panic. You can experience dread. You can experience pressure. It feels like real bodily threat. And it doesn't feel better until you then release that breath and come down. So this also kind of mirrors that pattern too. Now, the thing about this phase is that in a phase of unmaking, all those sensations can stretch out. So a phase of unmaking can feel like you are not breathing for months and months and months and months, that you're in this heightened state of panic and stress, and it's very bodily threat. So it can feel absolutely bloody awful. And I think this is really important. So I'm going to go back to my other image. Sorry for the toing and froing, but it feels like I need to show you these images so that you can understand where my thinking is going with the other stuff. Okay, so to recap, a person's been born and they haven't entered into a safe environment where they can be all of themselves. They're not able to be the shadow and the light, looking like a yin-yang, all combined and complementary and working together. For some reason, there's been a split. For some reason, then that split has become really dangerous, and it has changed from being able to be seen and safe to a biological setting being triggered. The fight and flight hasn't worked. The black and white thinking hasn't worked. There was probably a shit ton of anxiety happening here and that hasn't worked. And then boom, there's the fall into playing dead and being horizontal, hoping not to be noticed. Within all of that, though, is something else. You see this S here. So there's a moment often that happens where people who are frozen and playing dead, if they get a little bit of a sense of safety back, or if they get some sort of ability to make a decision back, their biology then gives them a spark. Now, the spark is when you go from feeling utterly frozen to knowing that you can move again. Now, in some people, that can be incredibly healthy. It can trigger a phase of discovering who you are, doing all the work to heal, and eventually converging to a point of being put back together as a yin-yang, you know, finding out your wholeness so you can do the recovery work. You know, you can go, okay, is my body safe? Is my environment safe? This is Maslow stuff as well. What are my relationships like? What do I think about myself? Who am I? Aha, now I know who I am. Okay, so you can do that process. But if you can't put yourself back together, if that is not possible, then what do you do? And I do wonder if, as well as the spark being this like pilot light and shot of energy that can fuel you to then heal and reconnect, it can also, if you can't turn inwards to put yourself back together, maybe it then sends you looking outwards. If you can't reconnect as a whole self, maybe you start searching for the missing piece outside of yourself. And I do wonder if that's what's happening. So people are going, okay, right, I don't feel whole. I don't feel complete. I don't feel like I'm going to survive. I feel like I need something that will enable me to survive. So there we go. Right. And then what happens here is they can find another person who becomes their missing piece. So let's say you've got someone who has narcissistic tendencies. Okay, they might find their missing piece in someone who needs a leader, someone who is a follower. And the follower, the person who struggles to make decisions, who panics about opinions, who, you know, all these kind of things, they might need someone who can be really in charge, who sounds like they know what they're doing. So let's say you're in a family group. This splitting has happened, the biological systems have triggered the playing dead, then the spark has happened that stops you being frozen and helps you mobilize, but the mobilization is not inwards, not turned inwards towards healing and reconnecting with yourself. It's turned outwards in the search for someone who can become your missing piece. And there we have, I believe, a trauma bonded relationship. And then when you find your missing piece, so the narcissist will find an echoist, the echoist will find a narcissist, then this becomes, I think, this pairing in the group. So within a group, within a family group, or a friendship group, or a community group, or a workplace group, you can have this happening where people pair off because they complete each other and they survive with each other. It would feel like they wouldn't survive without each other. So then they become this kind of self-contained cycle. Now, I've been experiencing a lot of stuff like this in all sorts of areas of life. You can see these kind of pairings of people. The interesting thing about that is that that pair will story their reel together. So if situations happen, they will go, oh yeah, this is what happened. So this person might go, oh, I think this is what happened, right? And say this is the narcissistic person with narcissistic traits. And this person will go, oh, yeah, I follow you, I believe you. So what they end up in this pairing is a cycle, self-contained cycle that other people cannot join, where they story their real and then they validate it between them. So they say, this is what happened. One person says, this is what happened. The other says, yes, it is. And they confirm each other. And so it's really, really hard. Like, I think the less penetrable thing is so true. Because those people then have a story that they're adopting into, and they believe it wholeheartedly because they've got validation from someone else. It is true as well, I really believe that, as well as kind of validating each other, keeping each other safe. They also do limit each other's growth. There's a really sort of thing that's come up for me with this. I think there's a blindness happens in a looping, self-containing paired cycle like this, because one person goes, this is what is real, and the other person goes, yes, it is, and then no other opinions are entertained. If someone from the outside then joins with a different opinion that threatens or it just challenges the opinion of this looping, it's completely dismissed and taken apart. If someone tries to hold a mirror up to the pair doing this, then the mirror is smashed essentially, and it cuts the holder. The messenger, they shoot the messenger. This self-containing loop limits growth because it stops both people having to question themselves, because they get validation all the time for what they're doing. They never have to question what they're doing. I think growth is limited as well because there's such dependency in this bonded pairing. If one person leaves, the other doesn't survive, because this is a split of something that should be a yin-yang, a complementary system, a complementary state where one thing does not exist without the other, like night and day. So if this, because that's what essentially they're trying to compensate for, is this lack of wholeness. They're finding it in someone else instead of themselves. So this is what I'm understanding. And please remember, this is my own processing and personal opinion. I haven't got this from study. So if one person steps out of that pairing, for the other person, it would be utterly devastating. That person would feel like they wouldn't survive because they need each other to survive. So how on earth do people break this cycle and begin to open up to the bigger, wider world and other opinions? I mean, I've been questioning this. Like, that pair would have to, first of all, see themselves, see what they're doing, but every reflection of that to them is rejected. And then they would have to break out of this thing that is helping them survive, that they formed really, really foundationally as a survival thing. So, like, healing feels threatening. Change in this instance would feel really threatening. And I think it's really, I'm trying to think, how could somebody break that cycle? And the only ways I can compute in my head are that either both would have to recognize this relationship dynamic together and do this growing together, or one person would leave and the other person would experience both people would probably experience the utter trauma of breaking a relationship that feels like survival. So at the top, I've just added some examples of that kind of relationship. Two adults of the same age can still have a relationship that has the dynamic of parent-child. One person can be more of a parent figure, one person can be more of a child figure. You can also have other sort of details of this, I guess, with the similar kind of foundational dynamic. You could have a leader and a follower. You could have the rescuer and the victim. You could have the person who needs a supply, and you could have the person who is a resource. Ultimately, though, this is self-contained, very, very hard to enter. It's a thing that happens between these two people who contain themselves in this tiny cycle, looping cycle. So they are blind to other opinions. They are blind to the fact they're probably doing this. Yeah, I mean, I think it can heal, but I do think it either takes both people to do that together or one person to break that partnership up. Complicated stuff, isn't it? Yeah. I would love to know, because this is me processing through this model, and it's all quite new to me, I would really love to know if people think I'm going along the right lines with this. Any feedback would be really appreciated. Thank you. And also thank you, Lynn. Your videos are really making me think. They're really making me consider some very, very difficult experiences that I've been having. You are incredible, and I'm very grateful for the information you're sharing. Thank you so much. I've never made a 20-minute video before. In fact, this is so long I've had to move and plug my phone in a different room. Yeah, I've never made a video this long. So if you have stayed to the end, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for witnessing this, for being here for my processing. And I hope that has helped you in some way as well. Relationships can be so complicated to understand, can't they, sometimes? And experiences and stuff in any area of life. So I just find visual processing really, really helpful, and I'm learning so much at the moment. I needed to get all of that down and out onto paper. Okay, take care everyone. Look after yourselves. Bye.